The whispers at the Clearwater Springs town hall meeting spread like wildfire as Bethany Adams stood before the crowd, her hands trembling but her voice steady as she refused to marry Harold Winters, the wealthiest rancher in the territory. It was 1876 in the Arizona Territory, and a woman rejecting a marriage proposal from such a powerful man was unheard of. The shock that rippled through the assembled townsfolk was palpable. "He threatened me," Bethany declared, her blue eyes wide with fear yet determined. "Mr. Winters said if I didn't accept his proposal, he would ruin my father's business and drive us from town." Harold Winters rose from his seat, his face a mask of indignation as he adjusted his expensive waistcoat. At 53, he was more than twice Bethany's age, but his influence in Clearwater Springs was undeniable. The silver-haired businessman owned half the buildings on Main Street and had most of the town council in his pocket. "This is absurd," he thundered, pointing a finger at Bethany. "The girl is clearly delusional. I merely offered her a respectable proposal, which any sensible young woman would be grateful to receive." The murmurs grew louder as the townsfolk began taking sides. Bethany could feel their stares boring into her. At 20 years old, she had lived in Clearwater Springs her entire life. Her father, Thomas Adams, owned the town's only bookstore, a modest establishment that barely kept them afloat. "Bethany Adams has always been known for her wild imagination," said Mrs. Hawkins, the mayor's wife, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Remember those stories she used to tell as a child, about seeing fairies in the creek?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Bethany felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Her father stood up beside her, his weathered face creased with worry. "My daughter speaks the truth. Harold threatened us both when she refused him last week." "More lies," Harold said with a dismissive wave. "Thomas is simply bitter that I'm foreclosing on his failing business. The bookstore hasn't turned a profit in years." Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "Now, Harold, that's the first I'm hearing about any foreclosure." "Because I was being generous," Harold replied smoothly, "but I see now that my kindness has been misinterpreted." Bethany felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was exactly what she had feared, Harold's influence turning the town against her. When he had cornered her in the bookstore last week, his proposal had been more like a business transaction. "You'll marry me," he had said, "or your father will lose everything." When she refused, his eyes had grown cold. "No one will believe you," he'd warned, "and no other man will have you when I'm done." "She's lying to avoid an honest proposal," someone shouted from the back of the hall. "My daughter is no liar," Thomas insisted, but his voice was drowned out by the growing chorus of accusations. The meeting devolved into chaos as people took sides, though most seemed inclined to believe Harold. As the wealthiest man in town, his word carried significant weight. The sheriff tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Bethany stood in the middle of it all, feeling increasingly isolated. It was then that a stranger rose from the back of the room. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and piercing gray eyes, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hardship. His clothes were dusty from the trail, marking him as a newcomer. "I believe her," he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the stranger. He walked forward with a slight limp, spurs jingling with each step. "And who might you be?" Harold demanded, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Name's Wade Callahan, just rode into town yesterday." He stopped beside Bethany and her father. "Been sitting in the back, listening to this whole affair. Seems to me you're all too quick to call this young lady a liar." "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Harold said dismissively. "You know nothing about our town or its people." "Maybe not," Wade agreed, "but I know a bully when I see one." He turned to Bethany, his expression softening slightly. "Miss, I don't know you, but I know his kind." He gestured toward Harold. "Men who use their power to get what they want, regardless of who gets hurt." Harold's face reddened with anger. "You're making a grave mistake, Cowboy. I have friends in this town." "And I've got eyes and ears," Wade replied calmly. "I've been watching you since this meeting started. A guilty man gets angry when accused. An innocent man just gets confused." He turned to face the crowd. This girl is terrified, and not because she's lying. The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. Wade's words had struck a chord with some, but others remained steadfastly loyal to Harold. "What's it to you anyway?" someone called out. Wade paused, considering the question. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he turned to Bethany. "Miss Adams, if it would help your situation, I'll marry you myself." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Bethany stared at the stranger in shock, unable to formulate a response. "Are you mad?" Thomas Adams sputtered. "You don't even know my daughter." "True enough," Wade acknowledged. "But I know she deserves better than being forced into marriage with a man who threatens her." He looked directly at Bethany. "I'm offering a way out, miss. Nothing more. You'd be under my protection, but I expect nothing from you." Harold let out a harsh laugh. "This is absurd. You think anyone will believe this charade?" Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "I think we all need to calm down. This meeting was supposed to be about the new schoolhouse, not personal matters." "Indeed," Harold agreed quickly. "And I suggest this drifter be on his way by morning. We don't need troublemakers in Clearwater Springs." Wade didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere just yet." As the meeting dispersed, Bethany found herself walking alongside Wade and her father, both men silent and tense. "Mr. Callahan," she finally said when they were a safe distance from the town hall, "that was either the kindest or the most foolish offer I've ever heard." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Probably both, Miss Adams. You can't seriously be considering this," Thomas said, looking between them. "I don't know what I'm considering, Father," Bethany admitted. "But Mr. Winters won't stop, you know that." They paused outside the bookstore, Adams and Daughter Booksellers, its windows dark in the evening light. The modest storefront was sandwiched between the general store and the seamstress's shop on Main Street. "Come inside," Thomas sighed. "I think we all need to talk." The bookstore was Bethany's sanctuary. Shelves lined with books reached from floor to ceiling, creating narrow aisles that she knew by heart. The scent of paper, leather, and dust filled the air. A small counter stood near the front, where she spent most days helping customers or reading during quiet periods. Thomas lit several lamps, casting a warm glow throughout the store. He gestured for Wade to take a seat at the small table they kept in the back for inventory. "Now, Mr. Callahan," he began, "I appreciate your intervention, but you must understand how peculiar your offer appears." Wade removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "I understand completely, sir, but I meant what I said. I've seen men like Winters before. They don't stop until they get what they want or until someone stands in their way." "And you're volunteering to be that someone?" Bethany asked, studying him carefully. There was something in his eyes, a shadow of past pain that made her curious. "I suppose I am," he replied, "though I admit it wasn't my plan when I rode into town. What brought you to Clearwater Springs?" Thomas asked. Wade hesitated. "Looking for work. I've been drifting since the war, taking odd jobs where I can find them." "The war's been over for 11 years, Thomas observed. "Some men take longer to find their way home," Wade said quietly. Bethany sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't press. "Mr. Callahan, while I appreciate your gallantry, I can't possibly accept such an offer from a stranger." "I understand," he said, standing up. "It was impulsive of me, but my offer stands should you find yourself in need." He placed his hat back on his head. "I've taken a room at the boarding house. I'll be in town for at least a week." As Wade turned to leave, the front door of the bookstore burst open. Harold Winters stood in the doorway, flanked by two men, his foreman, Silas Jenkins, and his lawyer, Edwin Palmer. "I see you've wasted no time securing your new protector," Harold sneered at Bethany. Thomas stepped forward. "Get out of my store, Harold." "Your store?" Harold laughed. "Perhaps you've forgotten who holds the mortgage on this building." He nodded to Edwin, who produced a document from his breast pocket. "This is a notice of foreclosure," Edwin explained in his nasal voice. "Due to non-payment of the mortgage for 3 consecutive months, Mr. Winters is exercising his right to reclaim the property." "That's impossible," Thomas protested. "I've never missed a payment." "The bank records say otherwise," Edwin replied, handing him the paper. Wade moved to stand beside Thomas, his posture tense but controlled. "Seems mighty convenient timing, Mr. Winters." "Business is business," Harold replied coldly. You have until the end of the week to vacate the premises. Bethany felt her world crumbling around her. This was exactly what Harold had threatened to destroy her father's livelihood if she refused him. You won't get away with this, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Harold's smile was chilling. I already have, my dear. Perhaps now you'll reconsider my generous offer. Before anyone could respond, Wade stepped forward. Miss Adams is under my protection now. Any offer from you is unwelcome. Protection, Harold scoffed. A drifter with nothing to his name, what protection can you possibly offer? More than you might think, Wade replied, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. The tension in the room was palpable. Harold's eyes narrowed, but after a moment he inclined his head. Very well, enjoy your last few days in this establishment. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Callahan, I'd watch my back if I were you. Accidents happen frequently to strangers in these parts. After Harold and his men departed, silence fell over the bookstore. Thomas sank into a chair, the foreclosure notice clutched in his trembling hands. He's falsified the records, he said finally. I've never missed a payment. Bethany knelt beside her father, placing a comforting hand on his arm. We'll fight this, Father. We'll go to the bank tomorrow and sort it out. You don't understand, Thomas said wearily. Harold owns the bank, or at least he has enough influence to make them see things his way. Wade remained standing, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Adams, if I may ask, how much do you owe on the mortgage? Thomas looked up. Just over $800. We've been paying it down for years. Wade nodded slowly. I see. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Mr. Callahan, Bethany said, rising to her feet. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't your burden to bear. Perhaps not, he agreed, but I've never been good at walking away from injustice. He looked around the bookstore, taking in the shelves of books and the cozy atmosphere. This place means a lot to you both. It's everything, Bethany said simply. My mother died when I was young. Father and I built this store together. It's not just our livelihood, it's our home. Wade's expression softened. Then we'll find a way to save it. We, Thomas echoed, surprised. If you'll accept my help, Wade clarified. I meant what I said at the town hall. I'm offering my protection in whatever form that needs to take. Bethany studied him, trying to understand this stranger who had so suddenly inserted himself into their lives. Why would you do this for people you don't know? Wade's gray eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed a deep well of emotion beneath his calm exterior. Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most. In that moment, something shifted between them, a tentative connection formed through shared adversity. Bethany didn't know if she could trust this man, but she sensed his sincerity. Very well, Mr. Callahan, she said finally. We accept your help, but I'm not agreeing to marriage. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough, Miss Adams, one battle at a time. As the night deepened, they formulated a plan. Wade would stay in town and help them investigate Harold's dealings, looking for evidence of his manipulation of the bank records. Meanwhile, Bethany and her father would continue running the bookstore as normal to avoid arousing suspicion. When Wade finally left for the boarding house, promising to return in the morning, Bethany stood at the window watching his retreating figure. She couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just changed irrevocably for better or worse. You think we can trust him? She asked her father. Thomas joined her at the window. I don't know, Bethany, but right now he may be the only ally we have. Morning dawned clear and bright over Clearwater Springs. Bethany rose early, her mind still churning with the events of the previous day. She dressed quickly in a simple blue cotton dress, pinning her dark blonde hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. As she descended the stairs from their living quarters above the bookstore, she heard voices. In the main room of the shop, she found her father deep in conversation with Wade Callahan. The cowboy looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, though no less imposing. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean shirt and his hair neatly combed. Good morning, Miss Adams, Wade said, tipping his hat as she entered. Mr. Callahan, she acknowledged with a nod. You're here early. I thought we should get an early start, he explained. Your father's been filling me in on some of the details of your situation. Thomas looked up from the ledger he'd been showing Wade. Harold's been buying up businesses all over town for the past 5 years. Most folks don't realize how much he controls because he operates through different names and corporations. It's not just us he's squeezing, Bethany added, joining them at the table. The Millers had to sell their ranch last year after a mysterious fire destroyed their barn. And the Wilsons lost their general store after being accused of selling tainted goods. Wade frowned. Sounds like he's been systematically taking over the town. And no one stands against him because they're afraid, Thomas said with a sigh, or because they benefit from his patronage. Well, that changes today, Wade declared. I visited the bank this morning when it opened. Bethany looked at him in surprise. Already, what did you find? Nothing yet, Wade admitted. The teller wouldn't show me any records without authorization from the bank manager, and he doesn't arrive until 9 o'clock. That's Mr. Patterson, Thomas explained. He's been manager for 20 years, but in the last few, he's become increasingly deferential to Harold. I'd like to speak with him directly, Wade said. Perhaps if we both go, Mr. Adams, he'll be more inclined to help an established customer. Thomas nodded slowly. It's worth trying, though I doubt he'll cross Harold. While the men prepared to visit the bank, Bethany opened the store for the day. Usually, mornings were quiet, with most customers coming in during the afternoon, but today seemed different. Several townspeople entered within the first hour, browsing without buying, their curious glances making it clear they had heard about the confrontation at the town hall. Mrs. Greenwood, the baker's wife, was the first to broach the subject directly. Bethany, dear, she said, approaching the counter with a book she had no intention of purchasing, everyone's talking about what happened yesterday. Are you truly refusing Harold Winters? Bethany straightened her shoulders. I am, Mrs. Greenwood. I have no desire to marry him. But child, he's the wealthiest man in the county, the older woman persisted. Think of the life you could have. No more worrying about finances, beautiful dresses, a grand house. A life without love or respect isn't worth those things, Bethany replied firmly, Mrs. Greenwood lowered her voice. And this stranger, this cowboy who offered to marry you instead, who is he? Mr. Callahan is simply a kind man who recognized injustice and stepped forward, Bethany said, unwilling to reveal more. The bell above the door jingled as another customer entered. Bethany looked up to see Willow Harrison, her closest friend and the daughter of the town's doctor. Willow hurried over, her green eyes wide with concern. Bethany, she whispered, pulling her friend aside. The whole town is buzzing with gossip, is it true? Did that handsome stranger really offer to marry you? Despite everything, Bethany couldn't help but smile. Yes, though it wasn't quite as romantic as people are making it sound. He was just offering protection. Willow's expression grew serious. You need to be careful, Beth. Harold Winters isn't a man to cross lightly. My father says he once saw Harold ruin a man in Tucson over a business disagreement. The poor fellow ended up in prison on trumped-up charges. That doesn't surprise me, Bethany admitted. He's already moving to foreclose on the bookstore. What? Willow gasped. Can he do that? Apparently, he can do whatever he wants in this town, Bethany said bitterly. Father and Mr. Callahan have gone to the bank to investigate. Willow squeezed her friend's hand. If there's anything I can do to help, just ask. You know I'm on your side. As the morning progressed, more curious townspeople filtered through the bookstore. Some offered sympathetic words, while others made their disapproval clear with cold glances and whispered comments. By noon, Bethany was emotionally exhausted from the constant scrutiny. When Wade and her father finally returned, their grim expressions told her everything she needed to know. No luck, she asked once the last customer had left. Thomas shook his head. Patterson claimed the records clearly show we missed payments in February, March, and April. He showed us the ledger but wouldn't let us examine it closely. I'm certain the entries have been altered, Wade added. The ink looked fresher on those particular lines, but without proper examination, we can't prove it. Bethany felt a wave of despair wash over her. So what do we do now? Wade's expression hardened with determination. We find another way. Harold Winters didn't build his empire overnight, and I'd bet good money he didn't do it honestly. There must be evidence of his wrongdoing somewhere. But where would we even start looking? Thomas asked. His office, Wade suggested, or his home, places where he might keep private records. Bethany stared at him in disbelief. Are you suggesting we break in? That's illegal. So is falsifying bank records, Wade countered. But you're right, we should exhaust legal options first. He paced the length of the counter, thinking, does Winters have any enemies, former business partners who might have information? Thomas considered the question. There was a man named Bartholomew Jenkins who owned the silver mine outside town. Harold bought him out about 3 years ago, but rumors suggested it wasn't an entirely willing sale. Where's Jenkins now? Wade asked. Last I heard, he moved to a small cabin near Willow Creek, about 10 miles west of town, Thomas replied, became something of a hermit after the sale. Wade nodded decisively. Then that's where I'll go tomorrow. If Jenkins has a grudge against Winters, he might be willing to share information. I'll go with you, Bethany declared. Both men turned to look at her with surprise. Absolutely not, Thomas protested. It could be dangerous. Father, this concerns me as much as anyone, Bethany argued. Besides, Mr. Jenkins knows me. I used to deliver books to him before he sold the mine. He might be more receptive if I'm there. Wade studied her for a moment, then nodded. She has a point, Mr. Adams. And I give you my word, I'll ensure no harm comes to her. Thomas still looked unhappy, but eventually relented. Very well, but you'll be back before dark, understood? As they finalized their plans, the bell above the door jingled again. This time it was Sheriff Miller who entered, his expression troubled as he removed his hat. Afternoon, folks, he said, nodding to each of them. Thomas, Miss Bethany, Mr. Callahan, Sheriff, Wade acknowledged, his posture subtly shifting to alert. I'm afraid I'm here on official business, the sheriff continued, looking uncomfortable. There's been a complaint filed against you, Mr. Callahan. What kind of complaint? Thomas demanded. Sheriff Miller sighed. Disturbing the peace, threatening behavior, and suspicion of carrying falsified identification papers. He looked apologetically at Wade. I'm going to need you to come down to the office to answer some questions. Wade's expression remained calm, though Bethany could see the tension in his jaw. Let me guess, Harold Winters filed these complaints? I'm not at liberty to say, the sheriff replied, though his expression confirmed Wade's suspicion. This is ridiculous, Bethany protested. Mr. Callahan has done nothing wrong. Be that as it may, miss, I still need to investigate the complaints, Sheriff Miller insisted. It's my job. Wade placed his hat on his head. It's all right, Miss Adams. I'm happy to answer the sheriff's questions. I have nothing to hide. He turned to Sheriff Miller. Lead the way, Sheriff. As they headed for the door, Wade glanced back at Bethany. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. After they left, Bethany turned to her father, her heart racing with anxiety. This is Harold's doing. He's trying to get rid of Mr. Callahan. Of course it is, Thomas agreed grimly. And it won't end here. Harold won't stop until he gets what he wants. Which is what? Bethany asked, though she already knew the answer. Me or the bookstore? Both, I suspect, her father replied. The bookstore sits on valuable property in the center of town, and you. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I'm just another acquisition to him, Bethany said bitterly. Another piece of property to own. Thomas placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We won't let that happen, Bethany. Whatever it takes, we'll find a way to stop him. As the afternoon wore on, Bethany found it difficult to concentrate on her work. Customers came and went, but her mind remained fixed on Wade's situation. What if Harold managed to have him run out of town, or worse, by closing time, Wade still hadn't returned? Bethany locked the front door with trembling hands, her worry growing by the minute. Should we go check on him? She asked her father. Thomas was about to respond when a knock sounded at the back door. Exchanging cautious glances, Thomas moved to answer it, keeping Bethany behind him. To their relief, it was Wade who stood in the alley, looking tired but unharmed. Mr. Callahan, Bethany exclaimed as he stepped inside. We were worried. What happened? Wade removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Sheriff Miller had a lot of questions. Most of them pointless, designed to keep me occupied while Harold spread more rumors around town. Did they charge you with anything? Thomas asked. No, Wade replied. The sheriff's a decent man caught in a difficult position. He knows the complaints are baseless, but he can't ignore them entirely. Bethany noticed a bruise forming on Wade's cheekbone. You're hurt. Wade touched the spot lightly. It's nothing. Had a brief encounter with Silas Jenkins and a couple of Harold's other men as I was leaving the sheriff's office. They made it clear I wasn't welcome in town. They attacked you? Thomas asked, alarmed. They tried, Wade said with a grim smile. Found out I'm not as easy to intimidate as they expected. Bethany fetched a damp cloth and, despite Wade's protests, insisted on cleaning the small cut beneath the bruise. As she worked, she couldn't help noticing other scars on his face and hands, old wounds that told a story of a hard life. Thank you, Wade said quietly when she finished. His gray eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that made Bethany's heart beat faster. She stepped back, suddenly aware of their proximity. You're welcome. Thomas cleared his throat. Mr. Callahan, perhaps it would be safer if you stayed here tonight. We have a small guest room upstairs. Wade seemed surprised by the offer. I wouldn't want to impose or cause you further trouble. You're already in trouble on our account, Thomas pointed out. And I'd feel better knowing Harold's men couldn't corner you alone at the boarding house. After a moment's consideration, Wade nodded. Thank you, Mr. Adams. I accept your hospitality. Later that evening, after a simple meal together, Bethany found herself alone with Wade in the bookstore while her father went upstairs to prepare the guest room. In the soft lamplight, surrounded by books, the cowboy seemed less formidable, almost contemplative as he examined the shelves. You like to read, Mr. Callahan? She asked, noticing his interest in a volume of poetry. When I can, he admitted. Haven't had much opportunity these past years, but in another life, books were good companions. Another life, Bethany echoed, curious. Wade's expression grew distant. Before the war, I was studying to be an engineer at a college back east. This revelation surprised her. She had assumed Wade was like most cowboys, rough-hewn and minimally educated. What changed? The war changed everything, he said simply. I enlisted in '62, spent 3 years fighting. By the time it ended, I was different. The world was different. He carefully replaced the book on the shelf. Some paths can't be retraced. Bethany sensed there was more to his story, much more, but she didn't press. Well, you're welcome to borrow any book that interests you during your stay. Wade smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. Thank you, Miss Adams. That's very kind. A moment of comfortable silence stretched between them before Bethany asked the question that had been on her mind all day. Why are you really helping us, Mr. Callahan? And please don't say it's just because someone once helped you. There must be more to it. Wade considered her question carefully. I suppose I've spent too many years drifting, Miss Adams, passing through towns, seeing injustice and riding away because it wasn't my fight. He met her gaze directly. Maybe I'm tired of riding away. And your offer of marriage, she pressed. Was that merely a strategy to challenge Harold? Partly, he admitted. It was impulsive, I'll grant you that, but the intent behind it was sincere. I meant what I said about offering protection with no expectations. Bethany studied him, trying to reconcile the mystery of this man. You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Mr. Callahan. Is that good or bad? He asked with a hint of amusement. I haven't decided yet, she replied honestly. Thomas's footsteps on the stairs ended their conversation. The room is ready, Mr. Callahan, if you'd like to settle in. As Wade thanked her father and prepared to retire for the night, Bethany found herself watching him, wondering about the life he'd led before arriving in Clearwater Springs. There was depth to Wade Callahan pain and principle in equal measure, and despite her best efforts to maintain caution, she felt herself drawn to the enigma of him. Later, lying in her bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about in their home, Bethany contemplated the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, her greatest concern had been ordering new inventory for the store. Now she was embroiled in a conflict with the most powerful man in town. Her family's livelihood was in jeopardy, and a mysterious cowboy with haunted eyes had offered her marriage. Sleep eluded her as her mind raced with questions and possibilities. What would tomorrow bring? And how would this precarious situation resolve itself? The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn broke with a spectacular array of colors painting the Arizona sky. Bethany had risen early, unable to sleep past first light after a restless night. She dressed quickly in a practical riding skirt and blouse, her thoughts focused on the day ahead and their planned visit to Bartholomew Jenkins. When she entered the kitchen, she was surprised to find Wade already awake and brewing coffee. He had evidently been up for some time, his hair damp from washing and his clothes neat. "Good morning, Miss Adams," he greeted her. "I hope you don't mind my making myself at home." "Not at all," she replied, grateful for the coffee. "I see you're an early riser as well." Wade nodded, pouring her a cup. Habit from years on the trail, sunup means time to move. They sat at the small kitchen table, the quiet morning creating an unexpected intimacy. Bethany found herself studying Wade's profile as he gazed out the window at the awakening town. In repose, his features seemed less hardened, revealing a gentleness she hadn't noticed before. "Are you having second thoughts about today?" he asked, catching her observation. "No," she assured him. "I'm just wondering what Mr. Jenkins will tell us if anything." He became quite reclusive after selling the mine. "People who have been wronged often want to tell their stories," Wade said. "They just need someone willing to listen." Thomas joined them shortly after, and they discussed their plans over a simple breakfast. Wade would rent horses from the livery stable, and he and Bethany would ride to Willow Creek, hopefully returning by mid-afternoon. "Be careful," Thomas warned as they prepared to leave. "Harold likely has eyes everywhere. It might be best to leave town separately and meet on the Western Trail." Wade agreed with this strategy. He would go first, securing the horses and riding ahead, while Bethany would follow 30 minutes later, ostensibly on a routine errand. As Wade departed through the back door to avoid being seen, Bethany felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. This wasn't merely about saving the bookstore anymore. It was about standing up to Harold's tyranny over the entire town. Half an hour later, Bethany left the bookstore, telling her father she was visiting Willow Harrison. She walked casually down Main Street, nodding to acquaintances while ignoring the whispers that followed her. Harold's smear campaign was clearly working. She could feel the change in how people looked at her, some with pity, others with suspicion. Once clear of the town's main thoroughfare, she quickened her pace, heading for the Western Trail where Wade would be waiting. The morning was warming rapidly, promising a hot day ahead. The landscape stretched before her rugged and beautiful, with distant mountains framing the horizon. She found Wade waiting at the agreed spot, holding the reins of 2 horses. The sight of him, tall and steady against the backdrop of the western landscape, brought an unexpected sense of reassurance. "Everything all right in town?" he asked as she approached. "As well as can be expected," she replied, "though I fear Harold's rumors are spreading quickly." Wade helped her mount a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "People believe what's convenient until the truth becomes unavoidable." They rode side by side, following the trail that wound through scrubland and rocky outcroppings. Bethany was an accomplished rider, having grown up exploring the countryside around Clearwater Springs. Wade rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Have you always lived in Arizona territory?" he asked as they crossed a shallow creek. "All my life," she confirmed. "My parents came west from Pennsylvania before I was born. My mother died when I was 8. Fever took her during a harsh winter." "I'm sorry," Wade said softly. "It must have been difficult for you and your father." "It was," Bethany acknowledged, "but we had each other and the bookstore. Books became our shared passion, a way to keep her memory alive, as she was the one who instilled the love of reading in both of us." "And now Harold threatens to take that away," Wade observed, his expression darkening. "Not just the store," Bethany said, "but everything it represents, our home, our livelihood, our connection to my mother." She straightened in the saddle. "That's why I can't let him win." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a bird the only interruptions. The terrain grew more rugged as they approached Willow Creek, with juniper trees and cacti dotting the landscape. "Tell me about Mr. Jenkins," Wade said as they began descending into a small valley where the creek flowed. "What kind of man is he?" Bethany considered the question. "Eccentric but brilliant. He was a mining engineer before he bought the silver mine. Invented several new techniques for extraction that made the mine highly profitable. He used to come to the bookstore regularly, ordering technical journals and novels alike. And Harold forced him to sell?" Wade asked. "That's the rumor," Bethany confirmed. No one knows exactly what happened, but Jenkins went from being a respected businessman to a recluse almost overnight. The mine changed hands, and Harold's fortune grew substantially. They crested a small rise, and below them, nestled among trees near the creek, stood a modest cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney, indicating occupancy. "That must be it," Wade said, reining in his horse. "How do you want to approach this?" "Directly," Bethany decided. "Mr. Jenkins knows me. We should be honest about why we're here." They approached the cabin slowly, making enough noise to announce their presence without appearing threatening. When they were about 50 yards away, the cabin door opened, and a bearded man emerged, a rifle held casually in his hands. "That's far enough," he called out. "State your business." Bethany urged her horse forward a few steps. "Mr. Jenkins, it's Bethany Adams from the bookstore in Clearwater Springs. We'd like to speak with you if you have a moment." Jenkins lowered his rifle slightly, peering at them with narrowed eyes. "Bethany Adams, Thomas's girl." "Yes, sir," she confirmed. "This is my friend, Mr. Callahan." Jenkins studied them suspiciously for a moment longer before nodding. "Come ahead, then," but the man leaves his gun on the porch. Wade complied without protest, removing his holster and placing it on the rough-hewn porch as they dismounted and tied their horses to a nearby post. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly neat and well-appointed. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that Bethany recognized from the store. A drafting table stood by the window, covered with technical drawings and notes. Despite his hermit-like existence, Jenkins had clearly maintained his intellectual pursuits. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a small table with chairs. "Coffee's hot if you want some." They accepted his offer, and soon the three of them were seated with steaming cups. Jenkins had aged considerably since Bethany had last seen him. His once dark hair and beard were now mostly gray, and deep lines etched his face. But his eyes remained sharp and intelligent as they assessed his visitors. "So," he said after taking a sip of his coffee, "what brings Thomas Adams's daughter and a stranger to my doorstep?" "Must be important to warrant a 10-mile ride." Bethany exchanged a glance with Wade before responding. "Mr. Jenkins, we need information about Harold Winters." Jenkins's expression hardened immediately. "What about him?" "He's trying to foreclose on our bookstore," Bethany explained, "and he's been pressuring me to marry him." A bitter laugh escaped Jenkins. "Sounds like Harold's usual tactics. Take what he wants by whatever means necessary." "We believe he falsified bank records to justify the foreclosure," Wade added. "But we can't prove it without evidence of his prior misconduct." Jenkins studied Wade intently. "And who exactly are you in all this?" "Someone who doesn't like bullies," Wade replied simply. The older man seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "Harold Winters is more than a bully. He's a predator who's built his fortune on the misfortune of others." "Like you?" Bethany asked gently. Jenkins's face clouded with old pain. 3 years ago, my mine was producing more silver than any other in the territory. Harold offered to buy it. When I refused, strange things started happening. Equipment failures, workers quitting without notice, then a cave-in that nearly killed 2 men. "Sabotage?" Wade asked. "I could never prove it," Jenkins replied, "but I knew. Then came the threats against my daughter in Tucson. She received notes describing her daily routine, the clothes she wore, where she took her lunch." His hands trembled slightly as he recalled the memory. "The message was clear. So you sold," Bethany concluded. "For a fraction of its worth," Jenkins confirmed bitterly. Harold called it being reasonable, I called it extortion, but no one would listen. Sheriff Miller tried to help, but without evidence. Did you keep any records? Wade asked. Letters, notes, anything that might show a pattern of behavior. Jenkins hesitated, then rose from the table. He went to the stone fireplace and removed a loose brick from the side, extracting a small metal box. Returning to the table, he set it down and opened it with a key from his pocket. I kept everything, he said, pulling out a bundle of papers. Not that it did me any good. No one was willing to stand against Harold once he controlled the bank and half the businesses in town. Wade and Bethany spent the next hour examining the documents. There were threatening notes, records of suspicious accidents, and most damning of all, a letter from Harold himself that thinly veiled his threats behind business language. This could help, Wade said, reading the letter carefully. It doesn't explicitly threaten you, but combined with the timing of the accidents and the other notes. It wasn't enough for the sheriff or the territorial judge, Jenkins warned. Harold is too careful to leave obvious evidence. But it establishes a pattern, Bethany pointed out. If we can find similar evidence from others he's wronged. Jenkins leaned forward. There are others. The Wilsons who own the general store, Old Man Rodriguez who lost his cattle ranch, Sarah Mitchell who used to run the millinery shop. All businesses that Harold now controls, Bethany realized. Directly or indirectly, Jenkins confirmed. He's systematic. First, he offers to buy. When refused, problems begin. Finally, he creates a situation where selling is the only option. Just like he's doing with our bookstore, Bethany said grimly. And with you, Jenkins added, his eyes sympathetic. Harold collects businesses and beautiful things with equal passion. Bethany felt a chill at his words, but she steeled herself. May we borrow these documents, Mr. Jenkins? I promise we'll return them. Jenkins hesitated, then nodded. Take them. They've done me no good gathering dust here. He fixed Wade with an intense stare. But be careful. Harold doesn't tolerate opposition if he suspects what you're doing. We understand the risk, Wade assured him. As they prepared to leave, Jenkins pulled Bethany aside. Your mother was a kind woman. She would be proud of your courage. He glanced at Wade, who was securing the documents in his saddlebag. And your protector there's more to him than meets the eye. What do you mean? Bethany asked. Jenkins shrugged. Just an old man's observation. His eyes have seen things, hard things, but he's still standing. That says something about a man's character. They thanked Jenkins for his help and began the journey back to Clearwater Springs. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and they traveled in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. What do you think? Bethany finally asked as they paused to rest the horses at a small watering hole. Is it enough? Wade sighed, removing his hat to wipe his brow. It's a start. But Jenkins was right. Harold is careful. We need more if we're going to stop him. Then we'll find more, Bethany said with determination. Mr. Jenkins mentioned others who have been wronged. We should speak with them. Wade studied her with admiration. You're not easily discouraged, are you, Miss Adams? I can't afford to be, she replied simply. Not with everything at stake. As they remounted and continued their journey, Bethany found herself stealing glances at her companion. In just 2 days, Wade Callahan had gone from stranger to ally to. She wasn't sure how to define what he was becoming to her, but she felt a growing trust in his steady presence. Mr. Callahan, she ventured after a while, may I ask you something personal? You can ask, he replied with a hint of wariness. I might not answer. Fair enough, she acknowledged. You mentioned studying engineering before the war. What happened afterward? Why didn't you return to your studies? Wade was quiet for so long that Bethany thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tinged with remembered pain. I was captured at Petersburg in '65, just before the war ended, spent 6 months in a prison camp. His expression grew distant. By the time I got out, my father had died, our family home had been sold to pay debts, and the world had moved on without me. I'm sorry, Bethany said softly. Wade shrugged. War changes people. I couldn't sit in a classroom anymore, couldn't focus on equations and theories when all I could see were the faces of men I'd killed and friends I'd lost. He adjusted his hat, pulling it lower over his eyes. So I headed west, became a different person entirely. And now, she asked. Who are you now, Wade Callahan? He glanced at her, surprised by her use of his first name. A small smile touched his lips. I'm still figuring that out, I suppose. The connection between them deepened in that moment of shared honesty. Bethany felt as though she was seeing beyond the tough exterior to the man beneath complex, wounded but fundamentally good. As they approached the outskirts of Clearwater Springs, Wade suggested they split up again to avoid drawing attention. I'll take the documents to your father. You should enter town as if you're returning from a social call. Bethany agreed, though reluctantly. Be careful, Harold's men will be watching for you. I'm always careful, Wade assured her with a confidence that both comforted and concerned her. They parted ways at a fork in the trail, Wade heading west to circle around to the back of the bookstore while Bethany continued toward the main road into town. As she rode alone, she couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The stakes in their conflict with Harold were rising, and she feared what desperate measures he might take if cornered. The town appeared peaceful in the late afternoon sun, but Bethany knew appearances could be deceiving. Beneath the tranquil surface, tensions were building. And somehow, she had found herself at the center of a brewing storm. Bethany entered Clearwater Springs from the north, maintaining the pretense that she had been visiting friends rather than riding to Willow Creek. She nodded politely to Mrs. Jameson, sweeping her porch, and smiled at the Cooper children playing hoops in front of their home. Everything seemed normal, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she neared Main Street, Sheriff Miller stepped out from the alley beside the barbershop, effectively blocking her path. His expression was grave. Miss Adams, he said, removing his hat. I need a word with you if you don't mind. Bethany's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. Of course, Sheriff, is something wrong? He glanced around before responding, lowering his voice. I think it's best if we speak privately. Would you accompany me to my office? Alarm bells rang in Bethany's mind. If the sheriff took her to his office, Wade might return to the bookstore and find himself walking into a trap. I really should get back to the store, Sheriff. My father will be worried. I'm afraid I must insist, Sheriff Miller said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It won't take long. With no choice but to comply, Bethany followed him to the sheriff's office, her mind racing with possible explanations and escape strategies. The building was quiet when they entered, no sign of deputies or prisoners in the cells at the back. Please sit down, the sheriff said, gesturing to a chair near his desk. Bethany perched on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt if necessary. What's this about, Sheriff? Miller sat heavily in his chair, looking suddenly older and wearier than his 50 years. It's about Harold Winters, your father's bookstore, and that stranger, Callahan. What about them? She asked cautiously. The sheriff leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I know what Harold's doing, Bethany. I've known for years what kind of man he is. She stared at him in surprise. Then why haven't you done anything about it? It's complicated, he sighed. Harold owns half the town. He employs most of the people here. And he has friends in high places, the territorial governor, judges, bankers in Tucson. That doesn't make it right, Bethany insisted. No, it doesn't, Miller agreed, but it makes it damn near impossible to stop him through official channels. He rubbed his face wearily. I've tried, believe me. Every time I've built a case against him, witnesses disappear or change their stories, evidence gets lost, and suddenly I'm investigating nothing. Bethany's anger flared. So you just gave up, let him terrorize people, let him threaten innocent women into marriage. I never said I gave up, Miller replied sharply. I'm talking to you now, aren't I, at considerable risk to my position and possibly my life. That gave Bethany pause. What exactly are you saying, Sheriff? I'm saying be careful, he warned. Harold knows you and Callahan rode out to see Bartholomew Jenkins today. He has men watching the trails and reporting back to him. Bethany felt cold dread settle in her stomach. How did he know? Like I said, he has eyes everywhere, Miller explained, and he's not happy about it. He's convinced Jenkins has evidence that could damage him, though the old man never had enough to make a solid case. What's Harold planning to do? Bethany asked, dreading the answer. The sheriff's expression was grim. He's called in some men from Tucson, hard men, gunfighters. They arrived this afternoon. My God, Bethany whispered, we have to warn Wade, Mr. Callahan. That's why I stopped you, Miller confirmed. Harold's men are watching your store if Callahan tries to return there. Bethany stood abruptly. I have to go, my father's alone there. Wait, Miller cautioned, rising as well. You can't just rush in. That's what Harold wants, an excuse for his men to act. What do you suggest then? Bethany demanded. The sheriff considered for a moment. I'll escort you home. My presence might deter immediate trouble. And tonight after dark, I'll help you and your father leave town temporarily until I can sort this out. Leave town, Bethany echoed in disbelief. Run away, that's your solution. It's not running away, Miller insisted. It's a strategic retreat. Harold's influence doesn't extend far beyond Clearwater Springs. In Tucson, you could seek help from the territorial authorities. Bethany shook her head firmly. No, I won't be driven from my home. That's exactly what Harold wants, for us to abandon the bookstore so he can claim it. The sheriff looked frustrated but not surprised by her refusal. Then at least let me help ensure your safety tonight. Harold won't act openly with me present. They left the sheriff's office together, walking the short distance to Adams and Daughter Booksellers. Bethany's eyes scanned the street anxiously, looking for Wade or signs of Harold's men. The town seemed unnaturally quiet for late afternoon, with fewer people than usual on the boardwalks. When they reached the bookstore, Bethany was relieved to see her father through the window, apparently unharmed and helping a customer. The bell jingled as they entered, and Thomas looked up with obvious relief. Bethany, he said, coming around the counter. Sheriff Miller, the customer, Mrs. Wellington quickly completed her purchase and left, clearly sensing tension in the air. Has Mr. Callahan returned? Bethany asked once they were alone. Thomas shook his head. No, I haven't seen him since you both left this morning. Bethany exchanged a worried glance with the sheriff. He should have been back by now. Maybe he's being cautious, Miller suggested. If he spotted Harold's men watching the store, he might be waiting for an opportunity to approach safely. Or they've already caught him, Bethany said, voicing her deepest fear. The sheriff's expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed concern. Let's not jump to conclusions. Callahan strikes me as a man who can take care of himself. As darkness fell, Sheriff Miller insisted on staying at the bookstore. Thomas prepared a simple dinner, but Bethany found herself unable to eat, her anxiety over Wade's absence growing with each passing hour. I should go look for him, she declared as they sat at the kitchen table. Absolutely not, her father and the sheriff said in unison. It's too dangerous, Thomas added, especially after dark. The sheriff nodded in agreement. If Harold's men are out there, you'd be walking right into their hands. So we just wait, Bethany asked in frustration, while Wade could be in trouble. I'll send my deputy to make some discreet inquiries, Miller offered. But for now, yes, we wait. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Bethany tried to occupy herself by organizing inventory, but her mind refused to focus on anything but Wade's safety. By 10 o'clock, the sheriff's deputy had returned with no news. No one had seen Wade Callahan since morning. Just before midnight, when the town had fallen completely silent, a soft tapping came at the back door. Bethany, who had been pacing the floor, rushed to answer it, but the sheriff caught her arm. Let me, he insisted, drawing his gun. He approached the door cautiously. Who's there? It's Callahan, came the muffled reply. I'm alone. The sheriff unbolted the door, keeping his gun ready as he opened it. Wade stood in the darkness, his clothes dirty and torn, a fresh cut above his right eye trickling blood down his face. My God, Bethany gasped, pushing past the sheriff. What happened to you? Wade stepped inside, his movements stiff and pained. Had a disagreement with some of Harold's welcoming committee. 3 of them jumped me as I was circling back to town. Thomas quickly bolted the door while Bethany helped Wade to a chair. The sheriff holstered his weapon, his expression grim. Are you badly hurt? Bethany asked, examining the cut on his forehead. I've had worse, Wade assured her, though he winced as she dabbed at the wound with a damp cloth. They were more interested in delivering a message than doing serious damage. "What message?" the sheriff asked. Wade's eyes met Bethany's. "That I should leave town by morning or I won't leave at all, and that Harold's patience with Miss Adams and her father is running out." "Did you get the documents to safety?" Thomas asked anxiously. Wade nodded, reaching inside his torn shirt to produce a packet of papers. "I hid when I saw them coming. Once they left, I doubled back and retrieved these." The sheriff took the documents, examining them with interest. "Jenkins's evidence, I've seen some of these before." "But you said it wasn't enough," Bethany reminded him. "Not alone," Miller agreed, "but combined with similar testimony from others Harold has wronged. We need to gather more evidence quickly," Wade said, grimacing as he shifted in his chair. "Harold's not going to wait much longer to make his move." Bethany finished cleaning his wound, her fingers gentle against his skin. "You need rest. We can continue this discussion in the morning." Wade caught her hand as she withdrew, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Thank you," he said softly, his gray eyes holding hers for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. The sheriff cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "I'll stay here tonight," he announced, "in case Harold's men decide to deliver any more messages." As they prepared for an uneasy night, Bethany found herself drawn to the window, staring out at the darkened town. Somewhere out there, Harold Winters was plotting their downfall, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. With Wade, her father, and now Sheriff Miller on their side, perhaps they stood a chance against Harold's tyranny. Still, as she finally retired to her room, sleep eluded her. Her thoughts kept returning to Wade, his courage, his integrity, and the way his touch had sent a current of awareness through her entire body. Whatever happened in the days ahead, Bethany knew with certainty that her life had changed irrevocably since Wade Callahan rode into Clearwater Springs. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Bethany descended the stairs to find Wade, her father, and Sheriff Miller already gathered around the kitchen table, deep in discussion. Wade looked better after a night's rest, though the cut above his eye had darkened to an angry purple. "Good morning," she greeted them, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The men nodded in acknowledgement, and Wade offered a small smile that made her heart skip a beat. "We've been formulating a plan," Thomas explained as she joined them. "Sheriff Miller believes we might find more evidence at Harold's office." "His office?" Bethany repeated. "You mean you're considering breaking in?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "As an officer of the law, I can't officially condone such action. But as a man who's watched Harold Winters destroy too many lives." He left the implication hanging. "What about the documents from Mr. Jenkins?" Bethany asked. "Aren't they enough?" "They establish a pattern," Wade explained, "but most are circumstantial. We need something more concrete: ledgers, correspondence, anything that directly proves Harold's illegal activities." "And you think such evidence exists in his office?" Bethany pressed. "Harold's arrogant," the sheriff said. "Men like that often keep trophies of their conquests, proof of their power. I'd bet good money he has records of every person he's ruined." Thomas looked troubled. "Even if such evidence exists, how would we obtain it? Harold's office is in his home, and it's well guarded." "Not tonight, it won't be," Miller replied. "There's a town council meeting at 7. As mayor, Harold is required to attend. He usually brings his house staff with him for appearances. The place will be empty for at least 2 hours." Wade nodded. "That's our window." "Hour," Bethany echoed. "You mean you're going?" "I am," Wade confirmed. "It's too dangerous for anyone else." "I disagree," Bethany said firmly. "I know Harold's house. I've been there for social functions. You haven't." Wade frowned. "Absolutely not. It's too risky." "More risky to have you stumbling around in the dark, not knowing the layout," she countered. "Besides, 2 sets of eyes will find evidence faster than 1. The men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with her proposal. "Bethany," her father began, "Wade is right. It's too dangerous." "More dangerous than losing our store, than being forced to marry Harold," she challenged. "This affects me more than anyone. I have a right to be involved." Wade studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "She has a point about knowing the house." He turned to Bethany. If and I mean if you come, you follow my lead exactly. At the first sign of trouble, we leave immediately. Understood, she nodded, relieved that he wasn't dismissing her outright. Understood. Sheriff Miller shook his head. I don't like this, but I don't see a better option. I'll ensure most of the town is at that meeting, including Harold's usual guards. What about the store? Thomas asked. It will look suspicious if we're all absent. You need to be at the meeting, Miller told him. Your presence will help divert suspicion. Act normally, raise concerns about the new road proposal, anything to keep attention away from Bethany and Wade's absence. They spent the morning refining their plan, identifying potential hiding places for incriminating documents and escape routes if things went wrong. The sheriff left shortly before noon, needing to maintain appearances and avoid arousing Harold's suspicion. Throughout the day, Bethany felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Tonight could change everything for better or worse. As she helped customers and organized shelves, she found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Wade, who was assisting her father with inventory in the back room. Their eyes met occasionally, and each time she felt that same inexplicable connection. By late afternoon, the bookstore was quiet. Thomas retreated upstairs to rest before the evening's activities, leaving Bethany and Wade alone downstairs. Are you afraid? Wade asked as they stood side by side, rearranging a display of new arrivals. Bethany considered the question honestly. Yes, she admitted, but not enough to stay behind. Wade's expression softened. You're one of the bravest women I've ever met, Bethany Adams. The use of her first name sent a warm flutter through her chest. Not brave, she demurred, just stubborn. Bravery often looks like stubbornness to those who'd prefer you stay safe and quiet, he replied with a small smile. She turned to face him fully. Why did you really offer to marry me that day at the town hall, Wade? The truth, please. His eyes held her steadily. Partly to challenge Harold, yes. Partly because I recognized someone in trouble and wanted to help. He paused, then added softly, and partly because something about you called to something in me from the moment I saw you standing there, refusing to back down even when the whole town turned against you. Bethany's breath caught at his honesty. And now, after knowing me for these few days. Wade took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Now, I think it might have been the best impulsive decision I've ever made. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Bethany found herself wondering what it would be like to cross that final distance, to feel his lips against hers. But before either could move, the bell above the door jingled, announcing a customer. The moment broken, they stepped apart. Wade retreated to the back room while Bethany greeted Mrs. Peterson, who needed a birthday gift for her grandson. By the time the woman left, the intimate atmosphere had dissipated, replaced by the tension of the evening ahead. As dusk approached, Thomas prepared for the town meeting while Wade and Bethany finalized their plans. They would wait until the meeting had started, then approach Harold's mansion from the rear, using the cover of darkness and the neighboring properties for concealment. Remember, Wade said as they prepared to leave, we're looking for ledgers, correspondence, anything that might prove Harold's manipulation of bank records or other illegal activities. We have 2 hours at most. Bethany nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. She had changed into a dark dress and practical boots, her hair tightly braided to prevent it from catching on anything. Thomas embraced his daughter tightly before departing for the meeting. Be careful, he whispered. You're all I have in this world. I will be, she promised. Wade will keep me safe. Left alone, Wade and Bethany waited in tense silence until the appointed time. Through the window, they watched townsfolk making their way toward the town hall. When the streets were empty and full darkness had fallen, they slipped out the back door and into the night. Harold Winters's mansion stood on a hill overlooking the town, a monument to his wealth and power. Built in the grand style with imported materials, it dwarfed every other building in Clearwater Springs. As Bethany and Wade approached from the cover of a neighboring orchard, its windows glowed with lamplight, though most rooms appeared empty. There's a servant's entrance on the east side, Bethany whispered as they crouched behind a stone wall. It leads to the kitchen. From there, we can reach Harold's study without crossing the main hall. Wade nodded, his expression focused and alert. Lead the way. They moved silently across the grounds, keeping to the shadows. The servant's door was locked, but Wade produced a set of slender tools from his pocket and made quick work of it. "Where did you learn to do that?" Bethany asked as the lock clicked open. A shadow crossed his face. "Prison camp." Sometimes skills acquired in desperate circumstances prove useful later. The kitchen was dark and empty, smelling of that evening's meal. They navigated through it carefully, avoiding hanging pots and utensils that might make noise. Bethany led them through a narrow hallway, past the dining room and toward the west wing where Harold's private study was located. "There might be a housemaid still here," she warned in a hushed voice. "They don't all attend the meetings." Wade nodded his understanding, his hand resting lightly on the gun at his hip. They paused at each corner, listening intently before proceeding. The house was eerily silent, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. When they reached the study door, Wade tried the handle. Locked. Once again, his picks made short work of it, and they slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind them. Harold's study was exactly what one would expect from a man of his standing, opulent, imposing, designed to intimidate. A massive desk dominated the room, behind which hung a large portrait of Harold himself. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that Bethany suspected were for show rather than reading. A liquor cabinet stood in one corner, crystal decanters catching the moonlight streaming through the windows. "We need light," Wade whispered. Bethany moved to the desk where a small lamp sat. "These matches should work," she said, finding a box beside it. The lamp cast a warm glow over the immediate area, keeping the rest of the room in shadow. Wade immediately began examining the desk drawers while Bethany turned her attention to the bookshelves, looking for hidden compartments or unusual volumes. "Most of these are locked," Wade muttered in frustration as he tried the drawers. Bethany searched the desktop, moving papers carefully. "There must be a key somewhere." As they worked, the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The portrait of Harold seemed to watch them with painted eyes, his expression smug even in oil and canvas. "Wait," Bethany said suddenly. "That portrait." She studied it more closely. "It's crooked," Wade joined her, examining the heavy gold frame. "You're right. And look, the wall behind it is discolored slightly, as if it's opened frequently." Together, they carefully lifted the portrait away from the wall, revealing a small wall safe behind it. "Predictable," Wade said with a grim smile. "Men like Harold aren't as clever as they think they are." "Can you open it?" Bethany asked, glancing nervously at the door. Wade studied the safe's dial. "It will take time, but yes." He pressed his ear to the metal door, turning the dial with methodical precision. Bethany kept watch, dividing her attention between the study door and the windows, alert for any sign of danger. After what seemed an eternity, Wade gave a soft exclamation of triumph as the safe door swung open. Inside were several ledgers, bundles of correspondence, and a small wooden box. "This is it," he whispered, pulling out the contents. "Help me go through these quickly." They spread the papers on the desk, working by the lamp's dim light. The ledgers contained detailed records of Harold's business dealings, including, Bethany discovered with growing excitement, evidence of bribes paid to bank officials. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an entry. "Payment to George Patterson, bank manager, for special services." The date matches when our mortgage payments supposedly went missing. Wade was examining another document, and here's correspondence with men in Tucson about arranging accidents at Jenkins's mine. His expression darkened. Harold's been careful with his wording, but the implications are clear. "Is it enough?" Bethany asked. "More than enough," Wade confirmed. "Combined with Jenkins's testimony and these records, the territorial authorities will have to act." As they gathered the most incriminating documents, Bethany noticed the small wooden box they had yet to examine. She opened it carefully, revealing several folded papers and what appeared to be official-looking certificates. "What are these?" she wondered, unfolding one. Wade looked over her shoulder, his breath catching as he read the document. It's a deed to a silver mine near Willow Creek. He took it from her, examining it closely. According to this, Harold never legally acquired Jenkins's mine. The deed is still in Jenkins's name, but Harold has been operating it and keeping the profits. That's outright theft, Bethany gasped, and easily provable in court, Wade added. This might be the most damning evidence yet. They carefully selected the most incriminating documents, replacing the rest to avoid immediate detection. As they prepared to leave, a noise from the hallway froze them in place, footsteps approaching the study. Wade immediately extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He pulled Bethany behind the large desk, his body shielding hers as the footsteps stopped outside the door. The doorknob turned, and light from a lantern spilled into the room as someone entered. From their hiding place, Bethany could see only a pair of boots crossing the carpet, not Harold's polished shoes, but the sturdy footwear of one of his men. "Hello," the man called out. "Is someone in here?" Wade's hand moved to his gun, his eyes never leaving the intruder. Bethany held her breath, pressing closer to him in the confined space. The guard moved around the room, his lantern casting moving shadows on the walls. He paused at the desk, and for a heart-stopping moment, Bethany thought they had been discovered. Then, apparently satisfied, the guard turned and left, closing the door behind him. His footsteps receded down the hallway, but neither Wade nor Bethany moved until the sound had completely faded. "That was close," Wade whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Too close," she agreed, suddenly aware of their proximity in the darkness. His arm was still around her protectively, their bodies pressed together behind the desk. Wade seemed to realize it at the same moment. He started to pull away, but Bethany caught his hand, keeping him close. "Wade," she whispered, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with their near discovery. In the darkness, she felt rather than saw him turn toward her. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle for a man of such strength. "We should go," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Yes," she agreed, even as she leaned closer. The first touch of his lips on hers was tentative, questioning. When she responded, his kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest than any words could express. In that moment, surrounded by danger in the house of their enemy, Bethany found something unexpected, a certainty that had eluded her until now. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "This isn't how I imagined our first kiss," he admitted softly. Bethany smiled in the darkness. "It's perfect," she whispered back. "Now let's get out of here while we still can." Gathering the stolen documents, they made their way back through the silent house, more cautious than before. They encountered no one else and slipped out the servants' entrance without incident. The night air felt refreshing after the tense atmosphere inside. They moved quickly through the grounds and into the orchard, putting distance between themselves and the mansion before pausing to catch their breath. "We did it," Bethany said, unable to contain her elation. "We actually did it." Wade's smile was visible in the moonlight. "We're not safe yet. We need to get these documents to Sheriff Miller immediately." They hurried down the hill toward town, staying off the main roads. The town hall meeting would be ending soon, and they needed to reach the sheriff before Harold returned home and discovered the theft. As they neared the sheriff's office, Wade suddenly pulled Bethany into the shadows of an alley. A moment later, she saw why Silas Jenkins and two other men were loitering outside the office, clearly waiting for someone. "Harold's men," Wade whispered. "They must suspect something." "What do we do?" Bethany asked. Wade considered their options. "We need to split up. I'll create a distraction. You take the documents to your father at the town hall. Tell him and the sheriff what we found." "That's too dangerous," Bethany protested. "They could kill you." "They'll try," Wade acknowledged grimly. "But I'm harder to kill than most." He touched her cheek gently. "Trust me, Bethany, I'll meet you at the bookstore." Before she could argue further, he handed her the documents and pressed a quick kiss to her lips. "Now go, while they're focused on the sheriff's office." Heart pounding, Bethany slipped away, keeping to the shadows as she circled toward the town hall. Behind her, she heard Wade deliberately making noise, drawing the attention of Harold's men. Shouts erupted, followed by the sound of running feet. Clutching the precious documents to her chest, Bethany ran faster, praying that Wade would be safe and that the evidence in her hands would finally end Harold Winters's reign of terror over Clearwater Springs. The town hall meeting was just concluding when Bethany burst through the doors, breathless and disheveled. The assembled townsfolk turned to stare as she hurried down the central aisle toward the front, where her father, Sheriff Miller, and Harold Winters sat at the council table. Bethany. Thomas rose in alarm. "What's happened?" Harold's expression darkened with suspicion. "What is the meaning of this interruption, Miss Adams?" Sheriff Miller was already moving toward her, reading the urgency in her face. "Miss Adams, are you in some kind of trouble?" "It's Harold Winters who's in trouble," Bethany declared loudly, holding up the documents for all to see. "I have proof of his crimes against this town and its people." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harold stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This is absurd." "Sheriff, I insist you arrest this young woman for slander." Sheriff Miller ignored him, taking the documents from Bethany. "What exactly am I looking at, Miss Adams?" "Ledgers showing bribes to bank officials, including Manager Patterson," she explained, her voice carrying throughout the hall. "Correspondence arranging accidents at Bartholomew Jenkins's mine, and most damning of all, proof that Harold never legally acquired the mine he's been operating it fraudulently for years." The sheriff examined the papers, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "Where did you get these?" Before Bethany could answer, Harold interrupted. "She broke into my home," he shouted. "These documents were stolen. This is a criminal matter, Sheriff. Is this true?" Miller asked Bethany quietly. She lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes." "Wade Callahan and I entered Harold's study and found these in his safe. We did what was necessary when the law wouldn't act." Harold's face flushed with rage. "You see, she admits to breaking and entering. Sheriff, do your duty." Miller held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Winters, these documents appear to detail serious criminal activity. If authentic, they warrant immediate investigation." "Of course they're not authentic," Harold sputtered. "They're forgeries, created by this delusional girl and her drifter accomplice to discredit me." The townsfolk watched the confrontation with growing interest, whispers spreading through the crowd as the allegations were laid bare. Thomas joined his daughter, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Where's Wade?" he asked quietly, creating a distraction. Bethany whispered back. Harold's men were watching the sheriff's office. As if summoned by her words, the doors of the town hall burst open once more. Wade Callahan entered, his gun drawn, blood trickling from a fresh cut on his cheek. Behind him came Silas Jenkins, also armed, and two more of Harold's men. "Drop the gun, Callahan," Silas ordered, "or I'll shoot you where you stand." The crowd scattered, women screaming as they sought cover. Sheriff Miller drew his own weapon, creating a tense standoff in the middle of the town hall. "Lower your weapons, all of you," Miller commanded. "This is a public meeting." Wade kept his gun steady, his eyes fixed on Silas. "Tell your men to back down, Sheriff. They attacked me in the street." "That's a lie," Silas shouted. "We caught him breaking into Mr. Winters's home." Harold seized on this. "You see, Sheriff. They're common thieves, nothing more." Bethany stepped forward, despite her father's attempt to hold her back. "We took nothing that wasn't evidence of crimes. The real thief is Harold Winters, who has been stealing from this town for years." "Enough." Miller's authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone lower your weapons now. This will be settled legally." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Wade lowered his gun, though he remained alert. Silas and his men reluctantly followed suit. "Now," Miller continued, "I'm taking these documents into evidence. Mr. Winters, you'll need to come to my office to answer some questions." "This is outrageous," Harold sputtered. "I'm the most respected man in this town. You can't possibly believe the word of a lying girl and a drifter over mine." "It's not just their word," came a voice from the back of the hall. Bartholomew Jenkins stepped forward, his expression resolute. "I'll testify to what Harold did to me in my mine." "As will I," added Mrs. Wilson, rising from her seat. "Harold threatened my family when we refused to sell our store." One by one, others stood, people who had suffered under Harold's machinations, but had been too afraid to speak out until now. The tide was turning visibly as the town witnessed Harold's power crumbling before their eyes. Harold's composure finally broke. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. He turned to Bethany, pointing an accusing finger. This is all because you were too proud to accept my proposal. I offered you everything and you chose that nobody instead." "I chose freedom," Bethany replied calmly. "And yes, I chose Wade, a man of honor and courage, over a tyrant who thinks he can buy people like property." Harold lunged toward her, but Wade was faster, stepping between them and catching Harold's arm in a vise-like grip. "That's enough," Wade said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've lost, Winters. Accept it with what little dignity you have left." Sheriff Miller moved in quickly, taking Harold by the arm. "Harold Winters, you're under arrest on suspicion of fraud, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." As the sheriff led a protesting Harold away, the town hall erupted in excited conversation. People surrounded Bethany, Wade, and the others who had stood against Harold, offering support and asking questions. Thomas embraced his daughter tightly. "You could have been killed," he admonished, though pride shone in his eyes. "We had to take the risk," Bethany replied. "It was the only way to stop him." Wade stood slightly apart, watching the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and wariness. When Bethany's eyes found his across the crowd, he offered a small smile that was meant only for her. Eventually, the excitement began to die down. The sheriff's deputies took statements from witnesses, and people gradually dispersed to spread the news throughout town. By the time Bethany, Wade, and Thomas left the town hall, the street was quiet once more, though lights burned in many windows as the gossip traveled. "What happens now?" Bethany asked as they walked slowly toward the bookstore. "The territorial authorities will be notified," Thomas explained. "There will be a formal investigation, likely a trial in Tucson. And the foreclosure on our store," she pressed. "With evidence of bank fraud, it will be invalidated," her father assured her. "We're safe now, thanks to you both." They reached the bookstore, its darkened windows a welcome sight after the evening's drama. As Thomas unlocked the door, Wade hesitated on the threshold. "I should probably find other lodgings," he said quietly. "Now that the immediate danger has passed, it wouldn't be proper for me to stay here." Bethany felt a pang of disappointment, though she knew he was right. "Where will you go?" "The boarding house, I suppose," he replied. "At least until—" He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. "Until what?" she prompted. Wade looked uncomfortable. "Until I decide what comes next." Thomas, sensing the undercurrent between them, tactfully excused himself. "I'm exhausted. I'll see you both in the morning. Wade, you're welcome to stay tonight at least. It's too late to disturb Mrs. Henley at the boarding house." After her father had gone upstairs, Bethany and Wade stood in the silent bookstore, the events of the night still vibrating between them. "You were very brave tonight," Wade said finally. "So were you," she replied. "Those men could have killed you," he shrugged. "I've faced worse odds." His hand reached up to touch the cut on his cheek. "This is nothing." Bethany stepped closer, reaching up to examine the wound herself. "It needs cleaning. Come to the kitchen." He followed her without protest. In the small kitchen, lit by a single lamp, she gently bathed the cut with warm water and witch hazel. Wade sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving her face as she worked. "That kiss," he said suddenly. "In Winters's study, I want you to know it wasn't just the danger or the moment." Bethany's hands paused in their ministrations. "I know, do you?" His voice was husky with emotion. "Because I need you to understand something, Bethany. When I offered to marry you that day in the town hall, it was impulsive, yes. But these past days, getting to know you, seeing your courage and your heart." He took a deep breath. "If I were to make that offer again, it would be for entirely different reasons." Her heart quickened at his words. "What reasons would those be?" Wade captured her hand in his, pressing it to his chest where she could feel his heart beating steadily beneath her palm. "Because I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "And the thought of riding away from here from you feels impossible now." Bethany felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Then don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Don't ride away," she clarified. Stay here in Clearwater Springs, Wade's expression softened. And do what? I'm a drifter, Bethany. I don't have roots or prospects to offer you. You have yourself, she countered. Your courage, your integrity, your heart, that's more than enough. She paused, gathering her courage. And you have me if you want me. The look that came over his face then was one she would remember for the rest of her life, wonder and hope breaking through years of solitude and pain like sunlight through storm clouds. Are you saying? He began, hardly daring to believe. I'm saying yes, Bethany confirmed, her voice steady despite the tears now spilling freely down her cheeks. Yes to the question you asked that day, and yes to the one you're not asking now. Wade stood, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. Bethany Adams, he said solemnly, will you marry me? Not because you need protection, not because of Harold Winters, but because I love you and want to build a life with you. Yes, she said again, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Yes, Wade Callahan, I will marry you. His kiss was different this time, not born of danger or fleeting passion, but of promise and commitment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I have nothing to offer you but myself, he said softly. That's all I want, she assured him. The rest we'll build together. As dawn broke over Clearwater Springs the next morning, news of Harold Winters' arrest and the revelations of his crimes spread rapidly. People gathered in small groups on street corners, discussing the dramatic events and speculating about what would happen next. The town felt different, somehow lighter, as though a shadow had been lifted from it. At Adams and Daughter Booksellers, Bethany awoke to the sound of voices below. Dressing quickly, she descended to find the store already open and filled with curious townspeople. Her father and Wade were at the center of the crowd, recounting the events of the previous night. Bethany, Thomas called when he spotted her. Come tell Mrs. Greenwood about the ledgers you found. As she joined the conversation, Bethany was struck by how differently people looked at her now. The skepticism and judgment had vanished, replaced by respect and even admiration. Several people apologized for doubting her accusations against Harold. We should have listened to you from the start, dear, Mrs. Hawkins said contritely. It's just that Harold had us all so convinced of his righteousness. Men like that are skilled at deception, Wade commented. They prey on people's desire to believe the best of their leaders. Sheriff Miller arrived mid-morning, looking tired but satisfied. Harold's been transported to Tucson, he announced. The territorial marshal took custody of him at dawn. The bank manager, Patterson, is cooperating fully, hoping for leniency. What about the mine? Bethany asked. The one Harold stole from Mr. Jenkins. The deed has been verified as authentic, Miller confirmed. The mine legally belongs to Jenkins. He'll be compensated for years of stolen profits. This news was met with cheers from the assembled townspeople. Justice, so long deferred, was finally being served. As the day progressed, more visitors came to the bookstore not to buy books, but to hear the story firsthand and to witness the growing romance between Bethany and Wade. Their engagement, announced by a beaming Thomas, became the new talk of the town. When's the wedding? Willow Harrison asked excitedly, hugging her friend. Bethany glanced at Wade, who stood nearby in conversation with her father. We haven't decided yet. Soon, I hope. You deserve this happiness, Willow said sincerely, after everything you've been through. By evening, the excitement had begun to settle. The bookstore closed early, and Bethany, Wade, and Thomas enjoyed a quiet dinner together, discussing the future. I've been thinking, Wade said as they sat around the kitchen table. With Jenkins getting his mine back, he'll need experienced help to run it properly. Are you considering taking a position there? Thomas asked. Wade nodded. Jenkins and I spoke this afternoon. He's offered me a job as operations manager. My engineering studies, limited as they were, would finally be put to use. Bethany couldn't hide her delight. That's wonderful, Wade. You'd be perfect for such a position. It would mean building a life here, Wade continued, his eyes on Bethany. Putting down roots after all these years of drifting. Nothing would make me happier, she assured him, reaching across the table to take his hand. Thomas smiled at the two of them. Well, it seems everything is falling into place. The store is safe, Harold is facing justice, and my daughter has found a good man. He raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, they echoed, glasses clinking in the warm kitchen light. Later, as Bethany and Wade stood on the small balcony outside the living quarters, watching the stars emerge above Clearwater Springs, she leaned against his solid presence, marveling at how quickly life could change. "A week ago, I didn't know you existed," she mused. "And now I can't imagine my life without you." Wade's arm tightened around her waist. "When I rode into town that day, I was just passing through. I had no intention of staying more than a night. What made you come to the town hall meeting?" She asked, curious about the twist of fate that had brought them together. He considered the question. "Honestly, I was bored and restless. The meeting seemed like a diversion." He smiled down at her. "Then I saw you stand up to Harold, so brave and determined despite everyone turning against you, and something just clicked into place. So when you offered to marry me, it surprised me as much as everyone else," he admitted with a chuckle. "The words were out of my mouth before I could think better of it." Bethany turned in his arms to face him. "I'm glad you didn't think better of it." "So am I," he murmured, bending to kiss her softly. In the weeks that followed, Clearwater Springs underwent a transformation. With Harold's grip on the town broken, businesses began to flourish again. The bank, under new management, reviewed all mortgages and loans that had been manipulated, offering fair terms to those who had been wronged. Bartholomew Jenkins reclaimed his silver mine and, with Wade's help, restored it to full operation, creating jobs for many townspeople. He moved back into town, becoming a regular visitor to the bookstore and rekindling his friendship with Thomas. The territorial court found Harold Winters guilty on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. He was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, his empire dismantled, and his assets used to compensate his victims. Through it all, Bethany and Wade's relationship deepened. He moved to the boarding house as propriety demanded, but spent most of his days at the bookstore when not working at the mine. Together with Thomas, they expanded the store's inventory, adding technical books and journals that attracted new customers from surrounding areas. On a perfect autumn day, 6 months after Wade had first offered to marry her, Bethany Adams became Bethany Callahan in a ceremony attended by the entire town. They were married in the town square, beneath a canopy of golden leaves, with Sheriff Miller presiding and Thomas giving away the bride. "I once offered to marry you as a way to protect you," Wade said in his vows, his voice clear and strong. "Today, I make that same offer for entirely different reasons. I pledge to love you, honor you, and walk beside you through whatever life brings us. Not as your protector, but as your partner, your friend, and your devoted husband," Bethany, radiant in a gown of cream-colored silk, replied with equal conviction. "I once called you the bravest man I'd ever met. Today, I know you are also the kindest, the most honorable, and the one with whom I want to share every day of my life. I pledge to love you, support you, and remind you when you forget that you are worthy of happiness and belonging." There wasn't a dry eye in the square as they sealed their vows with a kiss. Even the most skeptical townsfolk, who had initially questioned the hasty engagement, could see the genuine love between them. The celebration continued well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than the town had seen at one gathering in years. It was more than a wedding. It was a community healing, celebrating not just the union of Bethany and Wade, but the freedom of Clearwater Springs from Harold's oppression. As the festivities wound down, the newlyweds slipped away to the small house they had purchased near the edge of town, a modest but charming dwelling with a view of the mountains Wade had once planned to cross, never to return. "Happy?" he asked as they stood on the porch of their new home, the sounds of celebration still faintly audible in the distance. Bethany's answer was in her eyes, shining with love and contentment as she drew her husband close. "More than I ever thought possible." Wade's kiss was tender, a promise of all the days and nights to come. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan. Home, she repeated, savoring the word. Yes, that's exactly what this is. 5 years later, Bethany sat on the front porch of their expanded home, watching as Wade taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Margaret, played at her feet, stacking wooden blocks with serious concentration. The bookstore, now known as Adams and Callahan Booksellers, had grown into the largest in the territory, with a second location recently opened in Tucson. Wade still worked with Jenkins at the mine, though increasingly his attention had turned to their growing business and family. Clearwater Springs had flourished in the years since Harold's downfall. New businesses had opened, the population had grown, and a sense of community had blossomed where fear and suspicion once reigned. "Look, Mama," little Thomas called excitedly, "I'm riding all by myself. I see you, darling." Bethany called back, smiling at her son's accomplishment. Wade walked alongside the pony, one hand hovering near the saddle, ready to catch the boy if needed. His protective instincts had only grown stronger with fatherhood. As she watched her family, Bethany reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them all together. A cruel man's threats, a town's willingness to believe the worst, and a stranger's impulsive offer of marriage all had led to this moment of perfect contentment. Wade glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip a beat after all these years, held the same wonder and gratitude she felt every day. "I love you," he mouthed silently. "I love you too," she replied, knowing with absolute certainty that her refusal of Harold Winters had been the best decision of her life. For in refusing cruelty, she had found not just safety, but true love and happiness in the arms of a cowboy who had once said, "I'll marry you myself."